Hello and welcome back to All You Need Notes for Edexcel IGCSE History, and this time the second part of Germany 1918 to 45, that is the recovery of Germany 1924 to 29. This continues from the first episode where we went from the abdication of the Kaiser all the way through to hyperinflation, and now we look at the golden years of the Weimar Republic. In this video, I'll be showing two effects of all the things in this part of the specification, and these are a great revision if you've learned them for your questions B, C, and even A in your actual exams. So let's get on with it. Firstly, the introduction of the Rentenmark. The first effect of this was that hyperinflation was halted. So Gustav Stresemann, who was Chancellor at the time, he introduced the Rentenmark to replace the former mark so that prices stopped rising. If you remember the facts from the first episode, the price of bread rose from 1 mark in 1919 to 100,000 marks by 1923, so a huge increase. But he introduced the Rentenmark in September 1923, and this stopped inflation, it stopped prices rising. And in order to ensure that inflation didn't happen again, he controlled tightly the number of notes of the Rentenmark that were printed, which meant that, unlike what had happened with the whole hyperinflation, lots of notes couldn't be printed all at once, and therefore prices wouldn't increase rapidly as they had done here. Eventually, the Rentenmark itself was replaced by the more permanent Reichsmark, and they had the Reichsbank to control that, again the number printed, so this just made it more secure. Second effect was that confidence in the economy and the government were restored. So foreign countries could now rely on the currency of Germany. It wasn't worthless anymore, so they could begin trading with Germany again. So there were less food shortages, more imports and exports, and this led to increased Weimar popularity of Weimar for the Germans. They saw that the government was now able to control crises, so there was more trust in the government. And Stresemann himself felt empowered to go out and sort out the other problems in Germany. For example, the reparations bill from the Treaty of Versailles, which was still at a staggering 132,000 million marks, so a huge economic burden. And this led to different plans, for example, the Dawes Plan, which we're going to look at next. So the Dawes Plan, this also encapsulates US loans, which is technically a separate point in the specification, but they're very interlinked. So one effect of the Dawes Plan was that the German economy recovered. So an American official called Charles Dawes came to Germany and he agreed to loan Germany $800 million in April of 1924. So this was a huge amount of money at the time, still is today, and he offered this to help ease the economic burden and help Germany recover from hyperinflation. In turn, reparations were also lowered to 1,000 million marks for 5 years and 2,500 million marks per year after that. This just meant that reparations were more affordable, and so the government didn't have to spend as much money on reparations, so could use the money instead to boost industry in Germany. And finally, the French agreed to withdraw their troops from the Ruhr region, and this returned 80% of the coal and iron reserves to Germany, which meant that economic production increased, and therefore the government had more money. So it just helped general recovery. Second effect was that Germany now had economic reliance on the US. So by receiving loans from the US, Germany became reliant on the US economy. And this was unpopular with some because it seemed like the Germans were colluding with their old enemy, the US, from the First World War, and they were accepting this reparations bill. They weren't trying to get rid of it, they were just saying, okay, we'll have it, even though it was lowered. This was still unpopular with some of the right-wing nationalists. However, even worse for Germany was the fact that the German economy was now directly linked to the American economy, so that in October 1929, only 5 years after the plan was signed, the Wall Street crash happened, and this meant that the US banks, who were now struggling to get enough money, they recalled those loans that they'd given to German banks, And that meant that German banks had to recall the loans that they'd given to businesses. So it led to economic collapse in Germany as well as in the US. So it caused catastrophe in both countries and led to the Great Depression and arguably to Hitler's rise to power. Next, the Young Plan. So we're skipping a few years now. The first effect of the Young Plan was that it eased reparations burden. So reparations, the Bill of Reparations, it was originally agreed at the Treaty of Versailles to be 132,000 million marks. It was reduced in this plan by 20% in 1929. That again eased the pressure of paying for it. And furthermore, payments were payable over 59 years. So the economy was less harmed by having to pay all these reparations. They had longer to pay them. So it was less of an economic burden. And this led, because now the government had more money, because they didn't have to give as much to the Allies, this led to tax reductions in Germany. They could also give money to industry, so boosting industry, boosting the economy, and making more jobs. Second effect was that there was criticism for this long-term reparations bill. So many, again, right-wing nationalists, they felt that the government was accepting the Treaty of Versailles, they were accepting the war guilt, they were accepting the fact that Germany had to pay reparations, and right-wing nationalists were saying, no, we should not have to pay reparations. And they also felt the timescale for it was too long, so nearly 60 years. It was seen to be passing the economic burden of the war, the punishment for the First World War, to the next generation, to their unborn children. And some argued that it could wreak long-term damage to the economy, so they were constantly burdened by this reminder of the First World War. However, there was a referendum on the Young Plan, and only 14% of people disagreed with it. So it was quite popular. Few people disagreed, but it was adopted, and broadly speaking, people supported it. Now, the second part of this golden years of Weimar is looking at international plans. So rather than stuff that's based on the reparations, which we've seen now, we move on to the Locarno Treaties. So we go back in time a little bit, and this was in 1925. This also, I should say, is extremely popular for the B questions. They use this so much in the old specification. So if there's anything you do look up from this period, do look at the Locarno Treaties, because they love asking about this. Anyway, the first effect of them then, it settled uncertainties on the border. So Germany agreed in 1925 to accept the borders from the Treaty of Versailles. So for example, Alsace-Lorraine would stay French. And in return, the French agreed not to reinvade the Ruhr, which obviously led to hyperinflation, and they demilitarised the Rhineland in Germany. This just gave reassurance to both sides. So the French knew that the Germans wouldn't suddenly invade the Alsace-Lorraine, and the Germans knew that French would not reinvade the Ruhr. But again, extremist parties, they didn't like this. They didn't like Stresemann accepting the Treaty of Versailles, accepting the humiliation to Germany of having to lose all this territory, and they disagreed with it. Second effect was that Germany was now treated as an equal internationally. So other countries thought that Germany could now be trusted again, and treated well. So because Germany had agreed to keep the Treaty of Versailles, they demilitarised the Rhineland in turn. And this general getting on quite well led to European relations improving between countries. So we now saw European countries moving away from military action, from war, to better relationships. And as a sign of this peace, Germany was in the next year admitted to the League of Nations, and foreign investment into Germany increased as a result of that. So we'll have a look at League of Nations now. So the League of Nations, first effect was that trust in Germany increased. So the League of Nations was founded after the Treaty of Versailles, in order to stop a war like that happening again, but Germany was not allowed in, and this sign that they were allowed in after signing the Locarno Treaties, it showed that countries were again trusting Germany. And Stresemann even joined the League Council, of the League of Nations. So he had to make the most important decisions in the world, in Europe. It showed that Germany was on the world stage again, was trusted by the countries. And also because Germany was there and discussions could be made between countries, they could move more quickly towards peace. War looked less likely. And this led to signings of things like the Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1928, but we'll come on to that next. Second effect was that it restored German citizens' trust in the Weimar Republic. So Germans saw what had happened, and they grew more confident in the government, being able to handle their affairs on the world stage. So Germany had been disgraced, it had been humiliated after the First World War, and now they were in the League of Nations, they were trusted again. So they liked Stresemann, they liked what the government was doing, and so support for the moderate parties like the SPD increased. So there was less support for the right-wing, left-wing, extreme ends, because they saw that democracy and diplomacy, which were what these moderate parties were advocating, did actually work, and it did improve relations, and Germany was becoming more prominent and more powerful on the main stage. There was also, as I said on the last slide, increased foreign investment in German industry, so more countries trusted Germany now, so they invested more. But again, and this comes up in almost all the slides here, some small percentage disliked joining the League because it was created as part of Versailles. It was part of this whole idea of dealing with the old wartime enemies. You shouldn't trust them, etc. So there was some people disliked it. And finally, in this second video, we've got the Kellogg-Briand Pact, not related to the cereal. So the first effect, trust in Germany increased from other countries. So what actually happened with the pact? In 1928, over 60 countries, including Germany, signed a pact, and they agreed not to go to war. So these enemies from the First World War, 10 years after the end of the war, they agreed now not to use military force. Peace in Europe became more likely, and obviously no one wants war really. So it looked like a positive step away from military battles into a more diplomatic, more peaceful Europe. And as a result, because Germany had signed this, the Weimar Republic became more respected internationally. It led to the old allies agreeing to lower reparations as part of the Young Plan in the next year, in 1929. As we saw, it led to more trust, it led to more foreign investment. People on the world stage trusted Germany now a lot more than they had done 10 years prior. Second effect was that it restored the German citizens' trust in Weimar. So again, support for the moderate parties increased. Stresemann made Germany strong, made Germany well respected, and German citizens grew more confident in Weimar and future peace. The war had been horrible, hyperinflation had been horrible, they'd had a tough time of it, and now it looked like Germany was emerging from this. Germany was on the main stage, Germany was again powerful, Germany wouldn't be going to war again. It looked more prosperous, more hopeful, the future did, and so they were confident in Weimar and they were happy with what was happening, and so support for the moderate parties did increase. However, again, some small percentage still disliked Germany settling for peace with its old enemies. They hated its constant bringing up of the First World War. They disliked the fact that Germany had been humiliated in the war. They disliked that Germany had lost and was now having to pay reparations, and they disliked that Stresemann was now making friends with the old enemies, and so they disliked the pact. But that was a minority. And that is the end of this second part and the second video on Edexcel IGCSE History, the recovery of Germany from 1924 to 29, part of Germany 1918 to 45. I hope that you enjoyed this video. There will be some to come for the other three parts in the specification, and you can check out the first video as well, which covered the parts before this. And please, if you do like this, because I'm planning to do more on how to answer paper 1 questions, please do like and subscribe. Again, thank you for watching. Goodbye.